for writing about something that nobody knew anything about, whereas that was why it would not work. And our previous show, Jesus Christ Superstar, we were criticised because everybody knew the story, so therefore that wouldn't work. So the answer is, if you've got a good story and if you tell it reasonably well, and I think 40 years later I can claim we did tell it quite well, and of course I was well aware of her murky side, as well as her saintly side, if you like, seen from the Argentine point of view. But that, again, was of enormous appeal. You had two sides of the argument, and as playwrights considerably greater than I have said, if you can... I mean, the great thing about writing a play or a musical is that you can present both sides of the argument. And that's what we were able to do using the character of Che Guevara, who I discovered, having started work on Evita, was also Argentine. I thought he was Cuban. I mean, my own knowledge of Latin American history wasn't great until I began researching. And it's so true that hardly anybody in Great Britain, certainly, perhaps a bit in Spain, obviously, but very few people in Great Britain knew anything about Eva Perón at all. So they didn't think of her as a fascist or anything. But the fascism, I mean, Perón claimed to try and steer a way between fascism and communism. He, called it the third way, and it didn't really work. He ended up, I mean, once Eva went, he only lasted another 2 or 3 years before he was thrown out, although he did come back, briefly.
What was your attitude to the truth? Was it important to you to tell the truth, or did you think, this is a musical, this person is dead, we don't need to tell exactly the truth? What was your attitude to that?
Well, I think I was trying to be truthful. But, of course, with someone like Eva Perón, what is truth? As Pontius Pilate said in our other show. I mean, everybody, we all have truths. The question is your truth the same as my truth? And I'm very much torn between being a fan of Eva Perón and thinking she was an extremely murky person. There were certainly many...
What was the murkiness, by the way? Because we've heard about the good side of her.
Yes. I mean, the fact that people tended to disappear. But and anybody who opposed Perón and the way that he marshalled the workers against the so-called aristocracy ruling classes. But I don't think, at the time when Eva was alive, I don't think that they were any worse than the average dictator. I mean, the thing about Eva Perón was that she was glamorous as well, and I think she was a big factor in the huge attraction of Peronism. I mean, clearly she was. I remember the first question I was ever asked about Evita in the interview was, haven't you written, how can you glamorize this unpleasant woman? And I said, well, the fact that she was glamorous is the story. If she was not glamorous, it would not be as interesting a story as it is. She was very much a political figure, but that was dwarfed by her incredible personal appeal. And she played her cards very cleverly. She aimed at the class from which she kept saying, I came from this class, I'm wearing these jewels for you. I mean, it was dishonest, but at the same time, in a way, truthful. I mean...
May I persist with the theme of truth? I wonder how you react to other works of fictionalised history that you see. Very controversial at the moment is the new series of The Crown.
Yep.
Do you have a view about how far the artist is entitled to go in reproducing scenes which obviously didn't occur, but which tell some sort of truth? And do you have any feeling about whether The Crown has crossed the line that you would draw?
Well, I think The Crown is different because it's dealing with people, many of whom are still alive. And Eva Perón, of course, had been dead for quite a long time, even when we began working on it. And it's difficult. I would say that if you're going to offend people who are clearly not evil and not unpleasant, then I think I wouldn't want to go there. I mean, the fact that there was Eva Perón was 20 years dead when we began working on her. I think if she'd still been alive, I'm not sure I would have wanted to do it.
And talking about not wanting to do it, do you think you could do it today? Do you think you would be cancelled today writing a musical about someone who was thought by some to be a fascist?
I hope not, because I think people should be able to write about, within reason, almost anything. I mean, there have been plenty of I mean, as long as I mean, I wouldn't want to promote fascism or Eva Perón's way of life at all. But I think we attempted to get an accurate portrayal of why she meant so much and still does to so many people in Argentina. She had good points, you know, she had bad points, but that's true of an awful lot of people.
I have a passion for history, and whilst making a television documentary, I felt an extraordinarily exciting connection to the past when I was standing in a very large hole in a car park in Leicester. Shortly before my arrival in that hole, the medieval skeleton of a man had been removed. It had an S-curve to the spine, suggesting that he had suffered from scoliosis. This made historians think that the body might be that of King Richard III, who was killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 and buried in the Franciscan Church of the Greyfriars in Leicester. The skeleton was examined for DNA evidence. Richard's maternal line, or mitochondrial DNA, was matched to two living relatives of his eldest sister, Anne of York. Michael Ibsen and Wendy Duldig were 14th cousins and both carried the same, extremely rare, genetic lineage as the body in the car park. To great excitement, it was announced that the skeleton was, in all likelihood, that of the infamous villain of Shakespeare's play. A new film, The Lost King, is based on the real-life story of amateur historian Philippa Langley, who was the driving force behind that excavation in the car park in 2012. It premiered this week. Let's have a look.
I'd quite like to visit his grave.
There isn't one. You sure you want to join this group? You look quite normal.
I'm not. Do you have any books on Richard III?
We have 8 titles.
I'll take them.
Which ones?
All of them. I know you're some sort of apparition. I've been trying to work out why you're here. I wonder if it's because you're lost. I know I can find him.
Who?
Richard.
Richard who?
Sorry, the third.
The king?
Yes.
This is starting to look like an unhealthy obsession.
I can't believe you just said that. I'm doing this for you.
Plenty have tried and failed. Well, I wish you the best of luck.
How can you possibly find him on your own?
The key.
However, not everyone believes that the body in the car park was Richard III. My next guest doubts it. Dominic Selwood is an historian and author. Dominic, what a spoil sport. Why do you doubt it?
Well, the science is actually quite surprising. The carbon dating of the body actually shows that the skeleton in the car park died either 25 or 35 years before the Battle of Bosworth. But the research team accounted for that by saying he probably had a fish-rich diet, so they changed the numbers. The paternal line DNA, which is the most important one for Richard, that's his Plantagenet DNA, he doesn't have it. He's not a Plantagenet. And the researchers said, well, that's probably because there was an illegitimacy somewhere in the line of succession. The eye colour and the hair colour in the DNA code are for blonde and blue. But actually, all the earliest pictures we have of Richard show him dark. And the researchers said, well, that's because the Tudors changed the paintings because they thought the Tudors thought, you know, dark was bad. And then finally, the scoliosis you mentioned. There's no account in Richard's lifetime that he had any sort of spinal or back deformity. That came later with the Tudors, who also said that he gestated for 2 years in the womb. He was born with hair down to his shoulders and teeth. But what we see with the skeleton in the car park is not a hunchback. It is mild scoliosis, which actually, in all likelihood, would have been covered by clothes or armour. So actually, the science is a long way from proving it definitively. What we do have is the mitochondrial DNA you mentioned, showing that he came from the right maternal group. But all mothers give it to all their children. So in a very small period of time, you have a large number of people who have it. And when you're talking about the aristocracy of the late medieval period, someone buried in a friary somewhere, it's really not unlikely that there were many people who shared that group, even at the Battle of Bosworth.
You've made a lot of interesting points there. Let me just pick you up on the hunchback point. Did you say in passing there that there was no contemporary evidence that he had a hunchback or other deformity of the spine, that only comes with Tudor and Shakespearean propaganda later? That's
absolutely right. Yeah, there's no contemporary description of it at all. And it comes with the writers who, one in particular, had been saying very nice things about Richard during his lifetime, what a wonderful king he was, what a munificent leader. But then as soon as Henry VII comes in, he changes his tune and says that Henry VII is the saviour, Richard was evil. And then we start seeing these physical descriptions, because in the medieval mind, you know, physical deformity or infirmity spelled some sort of inner moral corruption. And so that's when that all begins. And the Hunchback dates from that period, not from his lifetime.
We didn't mention earlier that Richard is defeated at the Battle of Bosworth by Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor becomes Henry VII at that point, and he founds the Tudor dynasty, which of course includes Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Now, is it difficult for you to speak up and say this? Because obviously we've all had a kind of national party celebrating the fact that we found Richard III in the car park. Such a wonderful story. Is it difficult to go against this current?
I mean, it is a great story. And when it all happened in 2012 and then the burial in 2014, the nation needed a bit of a fillip. And we know that royal events do give a boost and people enjoy them. So, yes, it's not a particularly popular view. And people don't always like hearing it. But I think it's important because it's about our relationship with the past. Do we just say that history is, it's fine for us to mould it to become what we want it to be? Or does it matter what history is? And when you see things like the way Vladimir Putin uses history. I mean, I'm not equating the University of Leicester or the Church of England with Putin, but, you know, history matters. We think it doesn't, but then at times it pops up and comes very much to the forefront. And I think we do need to be honest vis-à-vis our history. And, you know, I wouldn't say categorically it's not Richard, but I don't think you can say, as the researchers did, that they're 99.99% certain it is. The science simply doesn't back that up.
Looking ahead to today's weather, in the UK is looking mild but windy with sunny spells and showery rain, more persistent in the southeast. Let's take a look at the details. Taking a closer look and starting off in the southwest, here we can expect frequent blustery showers, especially across Cornwall, though some sunny spells in between and highs around 12 Celsius. Meanwhile, a spell of persistent rain is set to push across southeastern England as we head towards lunchtime, turning heaviest around Kent and Sussex. Heading back to the west and across Wales, we can also expect a scattering of showers. Eastern parts have the greatest chance of staying dry. A drier picture for the West Midlands. A few showers will edge in during the afternoon, but for many it'll be dry with bright and sunny spells. Blustery but relatively mild. Looking across northeast England, and here there'll be something of a mixed bag. Around Yorkshire and Lincolnshire it'll be mostly dry with sunny spells, although showers will likely form further north. Also some showery rain for southern Scotland this lunchtime. Drier for a time further north, but cold air will feed in, bringing sleet and snow showers later in the day. Meanwhile, across Northern Ireland, it will turn pretty wet as we head through the afternoon as a band of shower rain pushes southeastwards with some heavier bursts and blustery winds. The changeable pattern continues through the end of the day with showery rain for many and snow showers for Scotland. And that is how the weather is shaping up for your Christmas day.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
My next guest made his professional music debut just over 50 years ago in September 1972 at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in London. In a very long and distinguished career since, Julian Lloyd Webber has worked with many other musical greats from Yehudi Menuhin to Sir Elton John. As a cellist, he's performed with many of the world's greatest orchestras, including every leading symphony and chamber orchestra in the United Kingdom. Now retired from playing, he champions young classical musicians with the Classic FM Rising Stars initiative, showcasing 30 young musicians under the age of 30. I can't say what a pleasure it is to have you here, Julian. Tell me a bit about the needs of young musicians and what it is that you can do for them with this Classic FM initiative.
Well, that programme started really through lockdown because I was principal of the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire at the time, and I was aware, you know, how hard these musicians practice, sometimes 6-7 hours a day. And I thought that the young musicians who were starting out were just having a terrible time because there was suddenly no outlet for their talent, and financially they were making suddenly no money. And I'm talking internationally here. And so I went to Classic FM with the idea of focusing on, in one programme, focusing on musicians under 30, you know, who maybe just made their first recording, were just coming out into the profession, and they went for it. And
what is it you can do for them? You give them exposure, do you?
Yes. I mean, that's the one thing that they didn't have. You know, when they work, I think people sometimes don't realise how selfless, actually, a lot of young classical musicians are, because it's not something you go into thinking you're going to make lots of money. I mean, in very rare occasions that happens, but basically, I think that they do it for the love of the music, and they want to bring it to people, so suddenly when you can't, it's quite a horrible thing. And I mean, I experienced that for myself when I had to stop playing. I had a herniated disc in my neck, which reduced the power of my bowing arm. And suddenly, and it was a very sudden thing, really. And then it makes you question your whole being, your whole self, yes. You know, who you are, what you're doing. And I just felt, well, I had a fantastic 40 years of playing, but those ones starting out didn't have that opportunity.
What is the exposure you give them then? Is it on Classic FM, or is it in some way that you're arranging public performances for them?
Well, what happened was that, of course, at that time there weren't any public performances. So we did 5 programmes that featured 6 artists each week, and we played their recordings and talked about them. Then Sky Arts came in on it, which is really exciting, and we've just actually done a second programme which was shown last Thursday, and they picked 6 out. And each year there's going to be another one.
Are these all instrumentalists or vocalists as well?
No, vocalists, the whole range. Vocalists, instrumentalists.
Well, what do you think about the health of classical music and the people who support it? There's been this announcement provisionally that Apple is going to start a classical streaming channel. We can, of course, already stream classical music on other streaming platforms,
yes.
And I do. One of the things I find, by the way, is that it's very difficult to get proper information on the streaming platform about what you're listening to, who, you know, which orchestra, which conductor, and so on. It's quite difficult to find that on regular streaming platforms. But are you quite encouraged by the idea that a classical streaming platform is going to be launched?
Yes, I mean, I'm in favour of anything that brings access to classical music. I mean, it's one of my bugbears, really, that I don't think that we have the music education we deserve in schools, because I think good music of whatever genre should be for everyone, for every young person, and not just the ones whose parents can afford to pay for expensive instruments and expensive tuition. So anything that brings wider access to classical music, I support. And in fact, during lockdown, it was very interesting that so many people turned to classical music, and all the streaming services and the radio stations reported a big increase in listeners. And I think that might be one of the reasons that Apple have come in on it.
They're reporting quite high percentages of people under 35 who are accessing classical music.
Yes.
Of course, it may be that older people tend to access streaming services less than younger people, so there may be a bias in that. But it looks like lots of younger people are interested in it. You raise a very interesting point there, a very sad point. Presumably the cost of living crisis is going to have an impact on young people learning music in schools.
Well, it could. Sadly, I'm afraid I think it will. It shouldn't. You know, I feel very strongly that you know, people are good at different subjects. People are good at maths and things, but not everyone's good at the same thing. And you see that people somehow think that music is a profession that is just something that is nice to have. Not look at the success of Adele in Las Vegas, and look at people like Elton John. They came through state schools.
Yes.
And we used to have a music education
and classical
system.
music, in the case of Elton John.
Elton, yes, he was at the Royal Academy.
Yeah.
But they came through state schools. And people forget that we actually had a music education system that was the envy of the whole world. I mean, when I went
and
to
now, what do we have now?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's much stronger in countries in Europe and Germany, the Far East especially. I'm afraid to say that they've overtaken us in that way.
And what is a parent expected to contribute to a student's education while they're at school, their music education while they're at school?
Well, I mean, you've never heard anyone say, I wish I hadn't learnt an instrument. You know, I just think that because it's not always in the schools, it's very good if parents can try to interest their children in subjects that are not necessarily taught at school all the time.
During the Second World War, in 1941, an elite British fighting force was formed in North Africa. Recognising the need to engage the enemy in an unconventional way, David Stirling recruited highly motivated, brave men to work in small teams. What became the SAS was born. In 15 months, the SAS destroyed over 250 aircraft on the ground and dozens of supply dumps and wrecked railways, telecommunications and enemy vehicles. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery describes Stirling as mad, quite mad. A new series on BBC iPlayer starts this evening, written by the creator of Peaky Blinders, Stephen Knight. When researching it, he found the truth so outlandish, he says that he had to tone it down for the screen. Here's a clip where David Stirling and Paddy Mayne, played by Connor Swindles and Jack O'Connell, begin to create the concept of an elite fighting force.
No one has ever parachuted in the desert before. Not ever. When a vulture spreads its wings out there, it goes up, not down.
So someone would need to try it.
Yes. Just us. You and I. I was hoping Mayne would join us, but we can do it without him. We prove it can be done. And we prove to each other that we are committed.
No one to stand us down.
No one to stand us down.
What should we call ourselves?
So you're in? Stirling, are you in?
You stole the parachutes. I was still in an airplane.
A great Great line. Well, Chris Ryan is a former SAS officer. He's written about the history of the regiment. Chris, welcome to GB News. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You met David Stirling?
Yes. Yeah, I met him in the 80s. It was like meeting, you know, your hero, your god. He was obviously the founder of the SAS, and I found him to be a very charismatic man, very quietly spoken, but he showed interest in me. I was a young trooper, and I was actually there because David was supporting a former colleague of mine to climb Everest, and he had a real interest in mountaineering. Now, I wanted to ask him about how he formed the SAS, and all he wanted to do was talk about climbing. He knew that I was heading off to Germany to do an Alpine Guides course. So yeah, sadly, the half an hour with him was just a conversation about rock climbing.
Yeah, David Stirling had wanted to climb Everest before all these events. Yeah. So back in the 1930s, he was a Scottish aristocrat. He was obviously very used to the hills of his home territory. He was a great hill walker and became a great climber. Do you know much about these early operations? I mean, I get the impression that the daring do involved was, I mean, verging on the irresponsible. The first mission that they operated in North Africa led to massive casualties. I mean, I think the vast majority of the group that went out there was lost either to death, injury, or capture by the enemy. How would you reflect on that spirit? I mean, that level of courage?
Well, actually, history has a way of repeating itself. On that first mission you mentioned, the guys were given a choice. They were to go in via aircraft, parachute in, but there was a storm brewing. The Met check basically came back that the winds were in excess of 30 miles an hour. You can just not do that on a static lying parachute. But Stirling knew if they didn't go, their unit would be disbanded. So the guys had a choice: stop, be disbanded, or go in. They went in, 60 plus men, and 21 came out. Now, I've spoken to several of the guys that were on that operation, and it came down to one chap had a broken back, other guys had broken legs, and they just had to shake hands and say goodbye, knowing their colleagues were going to die. Now, out of the 21 that got back to base, you would think, you know, that would be it was settled. Stirling then knew that he was RVing with the long-range desert group that had Land Rovers, so he then thought, if they can come there to pick us up, they can take us onto site. And they turned around immediately and went back onto them sites and blew up countless aircraft. These men were at the cutting edge of, you know, starting something. You know, they are the founding fathers of the SAS, and very brave man and very matter-of-fact about death. Obviously, we have to think about where Great Britain was. Dunkirk had happened the year before, Battle of Britain had been fought. So the country was on its knees, and these men, I think, were motivated to actually stop the Nazis expanding.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. 100 years ago, Britain was led by a coalition government, a legacy of the First World War. The Prime Minister was David Lloyd George, a Liberal politician who'd been in ministerial office since 1905 and was credited with having won the war, becoming Premier in 1916. He was also one of the key figures in devising the New World Order at the Treaty of Versailles, and he was a colossus in British and global politics. But the coalition was made up principally of Conservative members of Parliament, many of whom came to resent his leadership. Lloyd George was involved in a scandal selling honours, and his private life raised eyebrows. He was involved in a foreign policy adventure that went wrong, and the Conservatives took fright at a bad by-election result. The Labour Party was on the rise. Boris Johnson's fate reminded me very much of Lloyd George. On the 19th of October, 100 years ago, the Conservative Parliamentary Party met at the Carlton, the party's London club, and after a heated debate, voted to end the coalition. Lloyd George was ejected out of government, out of Downing Street. The Colonial Secretary, Winston Churchill, another Liberal, was out too. The Conservative Parliamentary Party had asserted itself. The following year, after a general election, a committee of all Conservative backbench MPs was set up and was named the 1922 Committee. It may have been called after the date of the general election, given that it had been in 1922 that the party had shown a Prime Minister that it was boss, I've always thought that its name carries more than a whiff of menace. In the present chaos, the 1922 may be encouraged again to flex its muscles. Philip Norton, Lord Norton of Louth, has been described as the United Kingdom's greatest living expert on Parliament, and he joins me now. You're going to tell me that the foundation of the 1922 committee has nothing to do with the ousting of Lloyd George. But let's join up the dots anyway.
Right. Well, there are two myths about the 22 committee, one of which you've already addressed, because quite a number of texts say it takes its name from the date in which it was founded. The other is that it came out of the meeting of the Carlton Club, which you've outlined. Neither is correct. I mean, if you touched upon, it takes its name from the fact it was formed of members newly elected in the general election of 1922, which of course was very late in the year following the collapse of the coalition. So in April 1923, one new backbencher, Gervase Rentoul, barrister, had been elected for Lowestoft, no parliamentary experience, arrived at Westminster. As you well know, some new MPs arrive at Westminster never having visited Parliament before, was bewildered by what was going on. and he talked to some other new MPs, they were bewildered. They got together on the 18th of April and decided, let's set up a committee, met again on the 25th, and agreed that they would have a body for mutual cooperation in dealing with parliamentary affairs and to enable new members to take a greater part in parliamentary affairs. So it was really a self-help group for new members. Of course, being new MPs, they weren't involved in the Carlton Club meeting. And so it was a fairly limited body. It was confined to new MPs. Following the next election, which came very quickly, of course, because Baldwin called an election late in 23, they opened it up to members newly elected in 1923. Of which there weren't that many, because the Conservatives did rather badly. It's only in the following Parliament they then opened it up to all Conservative private members. So it became a much larger group.
All Conservative members who weren't in ministerial posts.
Yeah, exactly, because the formal name was the Conservative Private Members Bracket 1922 Committee. So yes, private members. So it was opened up. But for many years, really until the Second World War, it was sort of a discussion group for information, for sharing information, limited impact on what government was doing. So there are really three key periods in its history leading up to where we are now. One is that formation of new MPs, a sort of discussion group. The other was the formation of a national government in 1940, because that created conditions that really allowed the 22 to come into its own. And then it built on that in post-war years.
To come into its own because it needed to continue to represent the interests of the Conservative Party in a multi-party coalition.
Exactly. So the government required unity in the whole House. It was a national government, and most party organisation, of course, ceased. So the 22 was the authentic voice of the Conservative Party. And, of course, government needed to keep members on side. So ministers were going along, including Labour ministers, to talk to the 22 to make sure that any dissatisfaction was kept there. And of course, there's quite a lot on the conduct of the war initially. And so that really set it up. It actually acquired quite an active chairman, Alec Erskine-Hill, who really pushed the role of the committee. Then developed in post-war years, of course, Conservative government under Winston Churchill, with Churchill having no idea about domestic policy, wasn't that interested. So he didn't so much lead as preside, and that sort of created a vacuum into which backbenchers could come. So, for example, getting rid of the BBC's broadcasting monopoly derives from members of the 22 pushing government, which resisted.
It's culture, it's tradition. The way it started in this country, of course, is that there's a great history of it. And it was originally a great way of lampooning politics. It was also a good way of getting to see girls' legs.
Okay.
Because you know,
best boy.
Principal boy was always played by a girl, but that's the reason, because they could wear tights, because at that time you could only get as far as seeing a woman's ankles. I think we'll probably get to the point now, because we can't have principal boys, we can't have girls playing principal boys. It's not that we can't, we just don't. And I think we get to this stage probably that dames may have to go.
Oh, no, he won't.
I hope not, because it's a great tradition and it's, you know...
What is the pantomime dame to you, the role?
Yeah, it's a good point, that, isn't it? What is it?
You've not figured it out yet?
Not really.
This time.
I'm playing Nellie Nurse in this. This is it, yeah.
Let's have a look.
For It Is She, and it's that well-known part in Snow White. She is Snow White's nursemaid. I know.
You've also talked in the past about the panto. The meaning of panto is more than just the silliness. There's actually there's a morality to it. There's an importance to what panto is about. The message to it.
I'm very strong on story because I think it's in the end it's for children, you know, and children have to have a very strong moral story, and it's got to be the fight between good and evil, and that's got to be very clear all the way through it, and you've got to tell the story really properly, and you've got to have something for the grown-ups in it as well. I saw my first panto when I was 6, and it was the thing that made me want to go into theatre, because I thought it was a warm place, it was a kind place, it was golden, it was safe, I absolutely loved it, and I've never forgotten the feeling. And I didn't want to be one of the kids dragged on at the end. I wanted to be in the know of where those tap dancing girls went trotting into the wings. I didn't know there were wings then. I wanted to know what was going on there. And even now,
I sit in the wings and you look through, and all the magic is going on stage, and it's beautiful, and I know that the audience are having a fantastic time, but they don't know how it's done, but I do, and to me that is still a magical thing.
Why does it work here, and why does nobody else get it? Because even people that have lived here that are from abroad still go to panto and they're like, it's an insanity to them.
I had some friends in from America on Saturday night. Well, honestly, they looked like they'd sat in a wind tunnel for 3 hours of it. They do get it in Canada. They don't get it in Australia, which is interesting, I think, or New Zealand.
But panto is also it's a wonderful thing for bringing anybody into the theatre. It's a gateway as well, which I think people sometimes overlook. It's a wonderful introduction.
That's absolutely right, yes. And this show, particularly, Snow White, I mean, it's so well done. The costumes are fabulous, the lighting is wonderful. It's kind of a full-scale musical as well, you know. So it's got something for everybody. The comedy is great.
What is the joy of panto? What's the key to delivering a good panto?
I never give advice ever.
But for you, for me, what makes a panto work?
Spirit. I believe in the spirit of a show, and I think if everybody gets on well, I mean, in the end, we're only playing in the dressing-up box, for heaven's sake, you know. We're not doing heart surgery. We've just got to have a lovely time. You've got to be patient. You've got to be focused. You've got to be disciplined. But most of all, you've got to have a lovely time, and you've got to get on. And as far as I'm concerned, my main job in the show is for everybody to get on. Well, that's what we're here for, you know.
The joy of it.
Because if we're not having a good time, there's no point, frankly.
Well, the impact of the internet and mobile internet technology may be regarded as a third industrial revolution, but now driven by big data, artificial intelligence, that's AI for short, is fueling a fourth industrial revolution. Technological disruption is often assumed to lead to job losses, although history shows that as jobs disappear, new ones are formed in new sectors. Think of the first industrial revolution, where people made redundant in agriculture moved to jobs in city factories. And more recently, we couldn't foresee that there would be work in information technology, finance, and global tourism. The arrival of artificial intelligence has again awakened fear of the future. In this industrial revolution, the machine can substitute not only for humans' manual activity, but their brain power too. Will we no longer be required to think? Is that fear as misplaced as it was in previous waves of technological advance? This week, the House of Lords heard from Ada, described as the world's first ultra-realistic humanoid robot artist. She was giving evidence to the Communications and Digital Committee for its inquiry into the future of the creative industries. Evidence was part of the debate on how technology is shaping and perhaps hindering the art and creative sector. Ada's creator, Aidan Meller, joins me now. Hello.
Hello, good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning to you. Could you describe to us, please, what Ada is capable of?
So Ada is a ultra-realistic robot that has been designed to be able to be creative. We have pioneered the ability for her to be able to paint and draw by sight, so she's able to look at you or a landscape, and from that she's able to create a work of art. And the astonishing thing about that is that it just wasn't expected in the technological field. Maybe robots could be used for Amazon logistics or pizza delivery, but for something so human, something that is so part of our identity, how can something non-conscious, non-sentient be able to create? And that's exactly what Ada's been able to do.
Can Ada reason? Can she debate?
She can't, no. She is able to speak, and she is able to speak in a way that makes you convinced that you are absolutely understood. But that actually doesn't take away the fact that you feel engaged with her when you speak. Ada is able to talk about her artwork, she's able to create, and the whole world of AI is enabling us to have these, what is going to be relationships with machines, and that is an astonishing step forward.
Well, as I said, Ada spoke to the House of Lords about her work and the creative process. Let's hear what Ada said to the Lords.
I produce my paintings by cameras in my eyes, my AI algorithms, and my robotic arm to paint on canvas, which result in visually appealing images. For my poetry, using neural networks. This involves analysing a large corpus of text.
Aidan, that is an extraordinary scene to me. So, is she being creative as such? The stuff...
Yeah, so it's something we work very hard at. Basically, the whole world of creativity is something that was considered very sacrosanct. So we had to understand what this word creative means. We realized, being a robot, that if we didn't absolutely nail this word creativity, people will think she's just a glorified printer. So what we did is we scoured around to try and understand intimately this word creative. And what actually came out of that is the definition by Professor Margaret Bowden, which was a creativity needs to be new, surprising, and of value. So the algorithms that run through Ada are new, they're unique to her. There's no other robot doing the work that she's doing. They're surprising. We don't know what she's going to do. We are literally looking over her shoulder to be able to see the work that she's creating. And in actual fact, even if she had the same image twice, she's looked at the same view twice, it would be a completely different image that she paints and draws. And of value, well, ever since we launched Ada in 2019, the interest in her has been enormous. Even her first exhibition at the University of Oxford had over 900 publications cover it. So we're feeling that the value of the whole debate about where technology is taking us is so very important.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mild for most and some sunny spells, but also windy with showery rain. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off looking at Scotland, and here there will be some showery rain across southern parts this afternoon, whilst colder air brings snow showers from the north later on. It will be very wet for a time across Northern Ireland as a band of heavy showery rain pushes eastwards with some strong winds. This same band of showery rain will push across northwestern England too, though it will take a bit of time to push across all parts. Sunny spells for much of Wales this afternoon, with a few showers feeding in from the northwest, turning wetter later as the band of showery rain sweeps across, temperatures widely in double figures. Meanwhile, it's looking mostly dry with decent sunny breaks across much of the East Midlands. More southern parts may have a little rain for a time, but this should clear through the afternoon. A similar picture across East Anglia. There will be some mostly light rain for a time, mainly across Essex, but for most it will be fine and dry with sunny spells. Across southern countries, the earlier rain will be clearing away to the east. Meanwhile, we can expect some further showers in the west, with some sunny spells in between. The band of showery rain will continue south-eastwards later, with colder air from the north bringing some snow showers. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. A shooting in a pub in Merseyside on Christmas Eve that killed a woman and injured a number of others has been described as heartbreaking. The woman died from her injuries in hospital. An investigation is now underway. 3 men were also taken to hospital with gunshot wounds after the incident at the Lighthouse Inn on the Wirral just before midnight. Millions of people across the country will be tuning in today to watch King Charles give his first Christmas speech as monarch. Charles recorded the broadcast, which airs later today at 3 o'clock. Speaking earlier, our GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker explained what the speech today will signify for the King as he pays tribute to his late mother.
King's expected to pay tribute to the life and legacy of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, in his first televised Christmas message to the nation and the Commonwealth. He is the first king, actually, to have a televised address, to give that message on Christmas Day. It was King George V who delivered the first Christmas message, but that was via radio, and his grandfather, King George VI, also delivered his via radio. It was only during the reign of Queen Elizabeth that we actually started to see television Christmas messages. But the King recorded it on December the 13th, on that Tuesday, in the choir of St George's Chapel. Very significant that it was in St George's Chapel, and that is because that is the final resting place of Queen Elizabeth II and her late husband, Prince Philip. So that is why perhaps the King is going to be paying tribute to his late mother in that speech.
Well, the King has attended the royal family's traditional Christmas Day church service in Sandringham. The King and the Queen Consort were joined by the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children. The Earl and Countess of Wessex were alongside them. This year's gathering at Sandringham is the first time the royal family spent Christmas at the Norfolk residence since 2019. The Archbishop of Canterbury has given his Christmas sermon paying tribute to the late Queen and remembering those who suffer immense anxiety and hardship. Justin Welby said there's unconquerable hope in the birth of Jesus Christ, despite conflicts around the world and the cost of living crisis. He's also praised the example set by the late Queen, saying she lived a life of service and put her interest after those she served. Over 1 million Americans and Canadians are facing Christmas Day without power as a winter storm continues to hit North America. According to reports, weather-related car accidents in the US left at least 16 dead. Nearly 3,000 flights were cancelled yesterday, with some airports closed. New York's governor has declared a state of emergency. Thousands of people planning to travel by train tomorrow are being advised to make alternative plans due to a rail strike. No train services or limited train services are expected on Boxing Day. It comes as members of the RMT union will walk out again in an ongoing dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. The disruption will also impact airport transfers, including London's Heathrow and Stansted Express. The lack of trains means the AA expects over 15 million cars to be on the UK roads tomorrow. A water firm is urging consumers not to pour turkey fat down the sink, as it could block the sewage systems. South West Water, which serves almost 1 million households across Devon and Cornwall, says the waste fat could clog pipework when it cools. The company says every year they deal with over 8,000 blocked sewers across the region. Now, thousands of people across the UK have kicked off their Christmas Day celebrations with a cold water swim. Hundreds of people braved icy waters, many dressed in Christmas clothing. That was along the coast in Suffolk this morning. And the bagpipes led proceedings at London's Hyde Park for many more brave cold water swimmers this morning. And the Prince and Princess of Wales have shared a Christmas painting created by Prince George. For those listening to us on the radio, the painting shows a portrait of a reindeer in the snow with a lovely sky blue background. Alongside it, with robins perched on the deer's antlers. And the message attached to this painting by little Prince George says Merry Christmas. And a very Merry Christmas to you. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. I'll be back with more news at the top of the hour.
"2022 is the year the royal family changed forever. We said goodbye to our beloved Queen and welcomed in a new king. I'm Cameron Walker, GB News' royal reporter, and I'm taking you on a journey, looking back on a major year for the royals and the enormous constitutional change that has engulfed Great Britain. Coming up,
we look back on a jubilant weekend of pomp and pageantry when the country came together to celebrate the Queen's 70 years of service.
For us all to be celebrating, not just the Queen, but life, our lives, our being together again, was, I think, something very, very special.
We'll share details of why Prince Andrew might have decided to settle out of court with his accuser.
It's often a strategy that they utilise just to make something go away.
Plus, Alistair Stewart and Arlene Foster reflect on what the passing of the Queen means for Great Britain. February marked the 70th anniversary of the Queen's accession to the throne. Her late Majesty was just 25 years old.
I've come to Sandringham when, on the eve of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, she hosted a magnificent reception in the ballroom of Sandringham House for locals.
The Queen renewed her pledge she made on her 21st birthday that her life would always be devoted to our service, and declared it was her sincere wish that Camilla would one day be known as Queen Consort. Former Mayor of Kings Lynn, Councillor Harry Humphrey, welcomes the Queen to the ballroom.
I expected really to be one of the people at the reception, but I was particularly honoured when I got there to say, where do I stand? And they took me over to the door. And I thought, why? Oh, because you're going to receive the Queen when she comes into her ballroom. I thought, what an honour. Absolutely fantastic. That was a wonderful moment.
Her late Majesty was president of Sandringham's Women's Institute. Yvonne Brown is the chairman and was invited to the reception.
Obviously she looked frailer because we'd had COVID and the Duke had died and everything, but she looked really, really well.
Do the rest of it.
She asked us how we'd all got on during COVID and what we'd been up to, and, you know, just chatted like she always does when she used to come to the meetings.
Well, that intimate reception for locals was followed by a global performance of pomp and pageantry. I remember it well. GB News' platform was just the other side of the road and provided us and you with a great view of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee weekend.
The Queen watched the traditional Trooping the Colour parade from the Buckingham Palace balcony. Her family joined her for the spectacular RAF flypast, the number 70, with shapes in the sky. Despite one or two tantrums, crowds cheered for the pageant celebrating different decades of Her Majesty's reign. And we had the privilege of seeing the Queen alongside 3 generations and her 3 heirs. To the public's delight, Her Majesty also made a surprise appearance alongside Paddington Bear. Katie Nicholl is the royal editor of Vanity Fair. Her book, The New Royals, contains new stories from family members, palace courtiers and aides.
There was such a global interest in this sort of mammoth 4-day celebration of the Queen's 70 years on the throne. And I remember speaking to many people there who weren't even monarchists. They were people who wanted to come and soak up the atmosphere, who wanted to bring their children down to be a part of history in the making, and of course to try and get, for those who were royalists, to have a glimpse of the Queen. And I do remember just having that sense of almost this being a bit of a swan song, that this was the final farewell. I mean, the Queen did look very, very frail, albeit happy to be there, but very frail. And I do remember thinking, I wonder if we'll ever see her on this balcony again.
The public reaction, the mood, it was quite emotional now that the Queen's no longer with us.
Absolutely.
But the fact that they were so clearly in love with the late Queen.
Oh, they were so happy to see her. I mean, I think there was a sense of jubilation because people had been able to come together. I mean, because of COVID, there hadn't been this sort of mass gathering for 2 years. So for us all to be together, for us all to be celebrating, not just the Queen, but life, our lives, our being together again, was, I think, something very, very special for people that were there.
And on the balcony, the decision was made that only working members of the royal family would be there, which meant no Prince Andrew, and
Yes.
it meant no Harry and Meghan. A decision for the palace which perhaps caused some controversy. What do you think were the reasons behind that?
Well, I think the decision for it to be just working royals on that balcony was the right decision. I think, you know, it was reflective of the direction that the monarchy has been moving in and is certainly moving now under the reign of Charles. And it was a way of neatly sidestepping 2 particularly difficult issues: the Sussexes and the rift at the heart of the House of Windsor, and of course Prince Andrew. I mean, it would have been absolutely awful for Andrew to have been up on that balcony and would have detracted from the star of the show, who was, and absolutely rightly so, the Queen.
Do you think there was any sense of Charles wanting to portray a slimmed down monarchy for when eventually he took over?
Charles's slimmed down vision of the monarchy is something that he's always wanted.
And it's something, that image of the Queen and then the 3 heirs is something we're probably never going to see again in our lifetime.
Well, we've not had a monarch and 3 reigning heirs, so it was a really powerful, important, historic image.
Prince Louis appeared to have a little bit of a tantrum.
Yeah.
Will and Kate, I suppose, it's a big decision for them to decide how much exposure to give their children at events like this.
Absolutely. Well, when we saw the Cambridge children in the carriage procession, I remember thinking, goodness, I mean, I don't know if I would trust my 4-year-old in a carriage. And there was the Duchess looking pristine in white, absolutely immaculate, as she always does, with these 3 beautiful, impeccably behaved children who knew to dip their heads when the colour passed. I mean, it was little details like that showed you, as much as the Cambridges and now the Waleses have done a brilliant job in raising these 3 children, giving them an ordinary life with play dates at the palace and going to pretty ordinary, albeit very privileged schools. They're also being schooled in that duty. And, to see them up on that palace balcony was a wonderful treat, I think, for all royal watchers, a reminder of the next generation of royalty, and so an important image in that respect. But I think it also humanises the royal family. It makes them all the more relatable. So yes, seeing little Louis having something of a royal tantrum in the royal box, well, hats off to the Duchess for her coolness when, she knew that cameras would be trained on her. And I particularly liked the Prince of Wales stepping in to say, come and pass him over to me, and putting Louis on his lap and having that wonderful moment where you saw him not actually as the Prince of Wales, but as a grandfather.
I also caught up with Pandora Forsyth. Pandora is the host of the Daily Express's Royal Roundup.
The royal family must be so proud of this summer just gone. It was genius. Everything from drones going in the sky, getting that modern twist on everything, through to those iconic moments where we saw Prince Louis having his cheeky behaviour, through to the late Queen, who came out on a couple of occasions.
The Queen, we know, had mobility issues.
There was no guarantee we actually would have seen her. I know on the build-up to it, it was very much on the day to see how she was feeling. We were very, very lucky to share that moment with her. And it will be memories, I'm sure, which will last all of our lifetimes. We've never seen anything like that. And I'm sure, actually, we'll never see anything like that again.
Only working members of the royal family on the balcony.
Of course.
No Harry and Meghan? No Prince Andrew?
No. That would have been the Queen's decision. Everything that we saw would have gone past the Queen. I think that set a very good standard, a very good precedent to what we will now see moving forward.
I can't stop talking about it without referring to the Queen and her surprise afternoon tea with Paddington Bear.
This was so sweet, and this is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of engaging the younger generations. Paddington Bear is a British icon, I think, for me anyway, and from whatever generation you're from, you'll know Paddington Bear. And it also gave a very sweet moment recently with her passing, where the Queen Consort actually gave out some of those bears which were lined outside the Mall all the way through to the palace, where people left flowers, bears, some of them left marmalade sandwiches, didn't they? Which they got told, you need to stop bringing marmalade sandwiches. But yes, she gave them, I think, to Bernardo's charity, just a few selection of them.
Coming up, was Will and Kate's Caribbean tour an unwelcome reminder of colonialism or unfair social media sensation?
Those were images of the past, of imperial rule.
And Alistair Stewart reveals what was going through his mind as he broke one of the most important stories of his career.
You just know that an awful lot of people will be listening and watching, and it is a determination to try and get it right.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mild for most and some sunny spells, but also windy with showery rain. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off looking at Scotland, and here there will be some showery rain across southern parts this afternoon, whilst colder air brings snow showers from the north later on. It will be very wet for a time across Northern Ireland as a band of heavy showery rain pushes eastwards with some strong winds. This same band of showery rain will push across northwestern England too, though it will take a bit of time to push across all parts. Sunny spells for much of Wales this afternoon, with a few showers feeding in from the northwest, turning wetter later as the band of showery rain sweeps across, temperatures widely in double figures. Meanwhile, it's looking mostly dry with decent sunny breaks across much of the East Midlands. More southern parts may have a little rain for a time, but this should clear through the afternoon. A similar picture across East Anglia. There will be some mostly light rain for a time, mainly across Essex, but for most it will be fine and dry with sunny spells. Across southern countries, the earlier rain will be clearing away to the east. Meanwhile, we can expect some further showers in the west, with some sunny spells in between. The band of showery rain will continue south-eastwards later, with colder air from the north bringing some snow showers. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. Now, the royal family was sent around the world in the spring to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, perhaps in an attempt to shore up support for the monarchy in Commonwealth countries. Charles and Camilla's visit to Canada proved, on the whole, a success. The biggest challenge arguably came from Prince William and Catherine's tour to Belize, Jamaica and the Bahamas.
The then Duke and Duchess of Cambridge helped restore coral reefs by going scuba diving. William played football with the locals, and Kate focused on early childhood development. But what should have been a goodwill mission turned into something quite different. An unfortunate picture of them greeting children through a wired fence echoed for some the historical slave trade. A ride on an open-top Land Rover used by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip decades before was described by local campaigners as colonial.
So was it a disaster? Social media sensationalists seem to think so. I'm not so sure, but what do my guests think?
Firstly, I spoke to Professor Rosalie Hamilton. Rosalie is a Jamaican academic and remembers the trip well.
I think over the last few years, and certainly over the last few months, especially since the royal visits of William and Kate, the information that the royal family started and profited from the trafficking of Africans and the enslavement of Africans was a wake-up call for many Jamaicans. They didn't know that.
Some people would argue, Rosalie, that the current royal family had absolutely nothing to do with what happened 200 years ago when the historical slave trade was going on. But perhaps your argument is that the current royal family are indirectly still profiting.
Not only have the royal family continued to benefit from that wealth, but on the other side, Jamaicans, Caribbean people, and people who have come out of this process of colonization continue to live with the negative legacies of that colonial process.
Before they arrived, the Advocates Network in Jamaica, which you are a part of, wrote an open letter to them, didn't you? So just explain what it said.
We thought that it was really inappropriate at a time when the country could least afford it for royals to be welcomed in our country, to celebrate an anniversary of their grandmother. We didn't feel that connection.
But there were also what appeared to be hundreds, if not thousands of people coming out to support Will and Kate on the tour, cheering, waving flags. What do you say to that?
The best evidence we have is a recent poll that was done in July of this year. And that poll suggested that about 27% of Jamaicans still support the royal family. The support is declining. Jamaica is the only country that still has a monarch. The British monarch as head of state is the only country that requires a visa to go to Britain. And importantly, a visa to access our highest court of appeal, the Privy Council. Now that has really troubled a lot of Jamaicans because they see that as unfair.
So Will and Kate's Caribbean tour proved controversial, perhaps for a number of reasons. Some people were saying that it looked too colonial and it didn't sit well with Jamaicans, did it?
It absolutely did not. Those were images of the past, of imperial rule. And I think it concretized in the minds of many that that old subservient type relationship persist. And other kinds of images where, you know, they were dancing with people in the culture yard and so on, were images that are more modern and reflective, but the fact that those images coexisted with other kinds of contradictory images suggested a lot that at the core, not much has changed.
The thing that frustrates me about the coverage of the photograph of Will and Kate greeting kids through a wired fence is because Raheem Sterling, a Jamaican football player, had exactly the same image pretty much taken on exactly the same day, but it didn't get nearly as much criticism, did it, as Will and Kate's did. So what are your thoughts on that?
Those images don't and can't distort and shift the real experiences of our people. Images don't whitewash that. And so it's the actual experience that we have of a monarch as head of state that seems inconsistent with our reality.
I think it was very much a mixed reaction, wasn't it? We all saw all those pictures with the hands through the fence. It shone a light on issues which have been surrounding the royal family for years. However, I do think that Kate, Catherine and William had no malice or ill intent behind that. And I think it's important, moving forward, they are aware of those issues, and people do hold resentment towards them in some parts of the world. And it's important to acknowledge that. And if people aren't listened to, that's when relations really do go down the pan.
Because the issue with the protesters, particularly in Jamaica, was calls for reparations from the British states, the royal family. Will and Kate weren't alive then. The Queen wasn't alive then. So do you think the whole intent of the tour was lost on social media because that was the narrative that went viral.
Yes, I think if the royal family had their way, then every bit of coverage and every bit of press would be positive. But we wouldn't be doing our jobs unless we really gave a real account of what happened.
It was a difficult situation for them, particularly with, do you remember the open-top Land Rover that they stood on?
Yes.
And some criticism came from that, saying it was too colonial. But actually, that was the Jamaican government who asked them to do that.
The royal family is so based on tradition. They like bringing in old traditions along the way and bringing them into modern life. I think now more thought process needs to go behind these moments. It's not of a time where, you know, every single newspaper is going to back that.
And I think what they did do pretty well with social media is release those videos of the two of them scuba diving, showing the underwater world. Of course, conservation, a huge issue for William in particular. There was lots of positives on this tour too, right?
Yeah, lots of positives, lots of great photo moments to take away. In fact, I remember some of the photos being on some of the front covers.
Another example of the pomp and pageantry of the United Kingdom was the